Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses, it's that time of year again.
Christmas?
No. G-Ferb, isn't he delusional? The sun is shining, the rainbow is lit, the birds are singing, but only the male ones, of course. And this can only mean one thing. Pride Month. By gosh, by golly, how do I cover this momentous month and celebrate all you gays in probably one video? And on the first day, no less. Can you believe I made this video in a day, you guys? I've already made the video and I don't know what it's going to be about. What, isn't that a sign that I made this whole video in a day? How half-baked of me. And now I find myself suffering from immense writer's block. Well, I tried. Sorry, all you gays. I already missed the Owl House. Because of that, I want to talk about the whole show at length. Would you look at that? Now I've got the perfect occasion. Let's start with Hootie. Nay, why don't we make this whole video Hootie? That's it. Just an hour-long psychoanalysis of Hootie the owl worm bird tube slinky stretchy thing. Real talk, would you guys be down for that? For realsies though, I loved this show. It took a while for me to get into, but I'm so glad I did. For every magical moment and every bullet this show took from Disney, which now feels very ironic, don't owls usually eat mice? We were there. This is the kind of show that feels like it ended too soon. Like, there was so much potential for another season minimum, but there were just so many montages and awkward pacing issues sprinkled throughout. And yet, through it all, an ability within the writing team to make some miraculously good episodes one after the next in the process. Can you tell I like this show yet? Owl House is a show that I'm kinda surprised isn't more divisive. The pacing is a roller coaster, sometimes in a good way, sometimes bad, and yeah, that's kind of the whole reason. Almost every problem I have with this show ties back to the pacing in some way. Some stuff feels rushed, some stuff feels like it takes too long to get to, some things start in one episode and then get pushed really hard in the next, some things you think will be important later and then they just never come back. You never really know what it's gonna be, but there are damn near perfect episodes way too often for a show like this. Sometimes I wonder if the parent company is just so full of crap that they would have the audacity to cut the final season down to 3 45-minute specials before the first season was even finished and ages before the show had peaked in popularity, only for the show to eventually go on to do well enough both on the internet and at conventions that the parent company would finally regret their actions long after the damage had already been done, and it was just too little too late, but pshaw, what are the odds? I think that's all the exposition we need for now. I don't see the point of summarizing my complicated thoughts before I dive deep into those complicated thoughts. That's what you came here for, right? I'm so glad I can discuss this whole show all in one video now. I've noticed that for some reason, most cartoon critics waited till the end of Amphibia to talk about it in a long-arse retrospective video, like this one right here. Whereas people covered Owl House as it aired across several separate videos. I don't know why, maybe just hype and stuff? Maybe I'm one to talk, because I did an Amphibia retrospective video, and I suppose even I covered Season 3 of Owl House a little more extensively as it aired, but if you YouTube search Owl House retrospective, it won't yield very constructive results. And you know what? I think that freaking sucks. So because I still haven't talked about this show nearly enough, why don't I be the first? How did we get here? When I bring up this show, what episodes come to mind? Ida's Requiem? Knocking on Hootie's Door? Hollow Mind? The Season 3 specials? If an episode from Season 1 came to your mind, kudos my guy. But I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume it was either Grom or Agony of a Witch. Looking back, Season 1 is definitely not peak Owl House. This is perfectly okay with me, or at least it ultimately was. Very few shows peak at the start. I don't think it was a matter of the show having yet to find its footing, because it clearly did by Season 2. I've seen all I needed to see, and I can tell Season 1 was not what the show was meant to be, and more what the show was forced to be. Dana Terrace has said that the show's first season involved a lot more quote-unquote collaboration with Disney, so it better fit what the network was looking for at the time. So Season 1 didn't really feel like Dana's vision of the show until the last few episodes. Having seen the rest of the series and comparing it to Season 1, which peaked at the end, it really shows. While Owl House has a lot of continuity from the start, most episodes feel merely like wacky adventures where there isn't much of an overarching story. Acceptably so, of course. If the writers want me to care about the characters, this is an effective way to do so. It's kind of funny because even the show eventually looks back on this season with a hint of sarcasm like, "Wow kids, remember when Luce was innocent?" I grew to love the show with time, so that's a surefire sign that Season 1 was a good place to start. But you know what wasn't a good place to start? The very first episode. I started watching Owl House while it was still pretty new. Like, right after the first season went on hiatus. Pretty much right after I caught up on Amphibia, I noticed just how many people were talking about this Owl House show and how it was the next big story cartoon of the current decade. Ready to dive into the first episode and judge a book by its cover, I did just that. Maybe I was simply too young to notice flaws at the time, but I wasn't really thrilled with the pilot, and I couldn't figure out why. Then it hit me. The episode was not good. A lying witch and a warden doesn't even feel like it's from the same show anymore. The problem is that the episode tries to be immoral more than it tries to be a story. You may be thinking, isn't telling a moral the ultimate point of a story? And you know what? You're right. Here, have a brownie. But that's why this episode fails as an introduction. Too much emphasis on the unoriginal be weird because being weird is good message, with way more implications through dialogue than actual displayed examples. Luce just didn't stand out to me in this episode. I don't have a problem with weirder protagonists who feel misunderstood, but there was just nothing done to make Luce stand out or feel sympathetic. Instead of showing maybe a 15-second scene of her packing for summer camp in her room, which would have shown off her weird personality, we just have lines like these.
I like editing anime clips to music and reading fantasy books with convoluted backstories.
These lines are so awkward when we don't know anything else about Luce. Why should I care that this human has a lot of weird stuff when she kind of just sounds like a typical high school art club member? What? And all we've actually seen of her being weird is her creating a dead bird loaded with spiders in art class, and then making a book report with live snakes and real fireworks in school. Yeah, I agree that no one should be punished for who they are, but there's a fine line between self-expression and public disturbance. And I'm gonna say it, Luce had done the 100-meter dash over that line. Some of you may use thanks to them as a means of defense for this episode, since that episode gives some further insight into the perspective of Luce's mom, Camila. There, we find out that Luce was in a low and dark place where she felt like she just didn't belong. Applying her personality doesn't seem to be doing anything for her academically. Some people just see neurodivergent kids with special interests and hyperfixations as the kids who act out for attention, when it's really just their way of interacting with the world. I honestly think it's a beautiful thing, coming from a place of both experience and noticing it in my peers. Unique talents aren't always useful for school, but it can still help you sometimes, a very common thing for those on both the ADHD and autism spectrum. It is canon that Luce has ADHD. I do also personally headcanon Luce being autistic, because there are a lot of traits that apply to both spectrums, many of which I see in Luce, but anyway. Camila can see this in her daughter. As Luce's mom, she probably knows better than anyone besides Luce herself. She finds a lot of Luce's quirks endearing. She even sees herself or other loved ones in quite a few of them. She kinda just had to go with it when the principal wanted to change her kid. Some schools just aren't caring in that regard, but parents just have to let it happen. It's a big hassle to move schools or whatever, so what are their options really? However, this enhanced knowledge of the pilot did not retroactively improve it in my opinion. This amazing representation of growing up neurodivergent was a strength of thanks to them. We didn't know any of this in the very first episode, from the crazily imbalanced telling to showing ratio, and what little we actually saw of Luce's personality making her even less sympathetic. I just didn't buy the whole weirdo shtick. Okay, my bad guys, I just got way ahead of myself there. Now, where were we? Ah yes, still episode 1. This video is gonna be 2 hours, isn't it? Well, the faulty weirdo archetype probably shouldn't continue to hinder my enjoyment of the episode, now should it? I mean, it's from here where Luce actually enters the demon realm. Things pick up from here, and the issue with the forced morals should by all accounts go away from here on out, right?
You're all just a bunch of weirdos. Like me.
I thought I had a lot of weird stuff. But this is impressive.
Why does everyone think that being a weirdo is so bad?
Oh, Titans, seriously? The first episode is as narrow perspective, conformity bad, individuality good as the show gets. Again, no one should be punished for who they are, but there are boundaries to weirdness that the social filter is supposed to provide. And the clunky forced dialogue and set pieces, which ignore those boundaries, just keep going. For starters, locking weirdos up in cages...
Do I need to say it?
And then, look. I don't mind that the conformatorium became a recurring location throughout the show. It makes sense thematically once the audience knows more about Belos, and it's honestly just a funny name. Here though, the prison being called that is just another nail in the coffin. I think I've already explained why the message here comes across as if it means to say any and all weirdness is good weirdness, but I just can't believe this episode wants me to root for Luce with that state of mind, when her entire character arc throughout this season is becoming a more mature and grounded person. It's like this pilot wasn't written with the rest of the show or even the season in mind. I love looking back at first episodes after shows are over and thinking, wow, look at where that led. So this pilot successfully contradicted the entire moral the show would go on to tell, and what has it got to show for it? A surprisingly great animated series. The pilot may have failed, but thankfully it was as bad as the show got. I will admit, the pilot nearly scared me away from this show. The second episode, which took me forever to feel like checking out for some reason, also hardly piqued my interest. Couldn't tell you why though. It's a better first episode than the actual first episode, because it's really more of an introduction to the Boiling Isles. It's still very much a second episode if that makes any sense, but it also works to its advantage very well. Luce really was just kind of a geeky lost kid in the very beginning. She expected to go on her own hero's journey, only for those delusions to be smashed. A fantastical magical civilization is still a civilization. And I mean, just listen to how Luce talks in this episode.
At this point, Azura had already been sent on an enchanted quest. Where's my quest-granting wizard?
Even if Luce's mystical adventure hopes are squashed like bugs, the episode ends with one of my favorite quotes in all of fiction.
Look, kid, everyone wants to believe they're chosen. But if we all waited around for a prophecy to make us special, we'd die waiting. And that's why you need to choose yourself.
Prophecies and mythical quests may be fictional, but hypothetically, you could still change the world if you wanted to. It's just up to you, not destiny. It's not the most solid episodes, since it does still have to do a lot of the heavy lifting before we actually get to go on adventures and stuff with these characters, but it's still a huge improvement and a much better blueprint for the series ahead of us. So naturally, it still didn't keep me invested the first time around. I may have been younger back then anyway, so I guess I just had a comically short attention span, but my attention span is even shorter now, so what gives? Guess we'll never know. But for some reason, I almost abandoned this show before really giving it a chance again. It wasn't until another month later, I watched episode 3, and then that was the episode that made me want to check out more. And I don't know why that is either. Teenage Abomination is way more boring and bland than I remember. Nerdy underdog who's capable of a lot more than they know, best friend with an upbeat, excitable energy, popular mean girl and or top student who pushes the underdog around because they apparently have no better to do with their life, the principal gets involved and nearly gets the main characters busted. You know where this is going. I don't know. I was probably just starved for a wacky adventure that didn't carry as much meaning. Amity was written like crap in this episode, might I add. I know it was kind of the idea to make her a straight up jerk, because we were only just introduced to her, so she hasn't changed at all. But it just doesn't feel like the episode was written with Amity's redemption arc in mind, either. We were even shown flashbacks later on in this season alone that Mittens always had a softer side, so why is she just so mercilessly mean and hostile about her top student badge to where you can't tell if it's played up for laughs or not? Ah well. Point is, 11-year-old me probably didn't know what quality was, and I actually got into the show from there. Which is good, because the show turned out to be actually really great. I'll start by saying that, as much as I bashed the pilot, Ida and King made pretty good impressions. The kind of mentor figure that Luce expected was the old, wise mentor who gave advice and quests through complex metaphors and flowery speeches that begged to be analyzed for the full, deeply philosophical meaning. Like, Luce, you must awaken the spirit of your soul with the honesty of your loyalty and unlock the soul of your essence with the key to your hope. Ida works so well because she just gives it to you straight. She's so charmingly snarky and sassy, and it's all complemented perfectly by the vocal performance of Wendy Malick. It just fits her like no other voice could. You know, a cool aunt vibe who pretends to be all cold-hearted but actually cares a lot. That's just something that applies to so many Disney cartoons, and yet none of them get enough credit for it. Every voice actor is pitch perfect for the role. On a half-related note, King. King is really fun to watch, but now that the show is done, I don't love him in Season 1. He was mostly just shafted to goofy subplots where he's trying to climb the stairs to success at a rate of half a step a minute. That's all funny and charming, but it's almost cringy how he doesn't grow as a character until later on. He's kind of annoying, but at the same time, that's the point. While Luce didn't exactly get what she expected in the demon realm, she still got to live out a fantasy. Ida was an antisocial shut-in, but Luce got a mentor figure. King was a narcissistic little monarch who didn't realize his whole life was a lie, but Lou still got a companion and a little brother. Hooty was Hooty, who I worship. I bring this up mainly because of the way the collector takes this all too literally in the Owl House game, but oh boy, we'll get to that. But I respect Season 1 much more looking back. We went on several adventures where the characters just hadn't grown up. It's such a trip going back to Season 1, probably because everyone felt and even looked way different back then. And while it's still not as good as what the show became, because, let's be honest, barely any shows peak with Season 1, don't worry, the writers feel just the same. Even the message was improved from be weird because weirdness is good to something much more mature and realistic, even just by episode 5. Convention is easily the best of the first 10 episodes. May I just start by saying, this show has so much fun with the world building. The creative team did such a good job making this fantasy realm a spitting image of the real world. For example, curses being the equivalent of chronic illnesses, and in this episode, covens being the equivalent of labor unions. While in our world you aren't legally required to join a labor union, you definitely lose opportunities by not doing so. I mean, there's a ton of options, why can't you find one right for you? Whereas in the demon realm, you legally have to join a coven. Ida doesn't stand for this, and she's not willing to have all her other magic sealed away at the cost of using just her favorite kind. This line that inadvertently gives the finger to the pilot does the best job at sending the show's message.
I get it, Ida. Coven's bad, individualism good. But I'm still figuring this world out, so I'm going to go in there and make up my own mind, okay?
This is such an exemplary, open-minded perspective. Lou should be allowed to make her own decisions if she's going to stay in the demon realm for a while. And even though we now know which way she goes in the end, this episode really helped pave the way. Conventions are fun, and persuasion is the goal of advertising, so this con really has a deceptive allure. Oh, and Amity? This should have been her debut. She's still far from becoming Luce's friend or ally, but we see more of where her anger at Luce is coming from. She worked so long and hard towards the goal of joining the Emperor's Coven, and while we didn't know at the time that this was more what her mom wants, there's still enough for it to be effective here. Any episode with these two for the rest of the season, as they go from rivals to crushes, is a joy. Some of the episodes in the first half of the season, which was all I had to go off of at the time, really blew me away. Some others were just kinda mid, and then there was just the most generic body swap episode I've ever seen, but at least it was all uphill from here. In retrospect, it was a bit more of a mixed bag than I realized at the time, but the show still had the potential to reap the next big story cartoon title that everyone was, for some reason, already praising it for. This show's very beginnings may have been a bit overhyped looking back, but there was still enough promise to fill an ocean, and dare I say it? The season even picked up a bit more steam in its second half. Season 1 got even better as its hiatus was over. I wouldn't say I disliked a single episode in the batch. The Luce and King ones like Sense and Insensitivity and Really Small Problems were simply pleasant and fun, Adventures in the Elements in the first day were both heartwarming in completely different ways, and ultimately, the show was just getting better and giving me more reasons to get hooked. And then, the episode that made me love this show. It's emotional, adorable, and has a great message, and for some reason it was the only time this show ever made me cry. Understanding Willow. It was cute enough watching all these memories of Amity and Willow as little kids, but the whole thing with the party and seeing their friendship end, I don't care that it doesn't really make sense how they saw Amity's memory in Willow's mind, I just can't. And then this line.
Willow, you were never too weak to be my friend. I was too weak to be yours.
I love this moral. If anyone feels like they don't have a place, even among their friends, you being you is not weak. You're trying your best, and those who can't respect that don't deserve the time of day. But it is never too late to change the minds of people around you. I just remember getting so misty-eyed. Gonna be honest, as often as I cry, shows and movies don't usually do that for me. I can understand why they do that for some people, but something really has to upset me to bring me to tears. Something deeply, personally, undeniably sad, you know? Normally for me, it's anxiety being a bitch and stuff that makes me cry, but this episode just did the trick. Crazy that this was somehow the only time my eyes didn't stay dry all series. Like, I cleared the ending of Agony of a Witch, the ending of Yesterday's Lie just barely, the ending of Reaching Out, the ending of Hollow Mind, all of O Titan Where Art Thou, the end of King's Tide, all of Season 3. How am I such a crybaby in real life? I would think I cry at shows and movies so rarely because there's only so much time to get attached to the characters, but you did it, Understanding Willow. You made me love this show. And give Hooty some of the love he rightfully deserved. I hope you're proud of yourself. And just in time for Grom. You guys remember the hype if you were watching the show when Enchanting Grom Fright first came out. Not just because of the relentless shipping fuel, but a celebration of how far the characters had come in just 16 episodes, and how much progress there still is left to make. There's this really on the nose and yet subtle underlying theme about overcoming your fears, which I found really effective. Luce realizes just how unready she's been all this time to tell her mom everything, and this episode feels more like genuine character progress for her than anything that came before it. Even after literally giving her fears a whack in the face in a beautifully animated dance sequence, Luce comes home just feeling not like $1,000,000. She thought maybe she could be a loyal friend and do something for Amity so she wouldn't have to, and after trying to prove herself to everyone who doubted her all dang day with methods like literal and metaphorical projection, she just can't process the idea of her mom finding out where she's really been all along. She feels out of place sometimes in the Boiling Isles, but she knows she'll be okay. Not because she's found her place, but because she's found people who have made this her place. We get to see Ida reflecting on all the time she's had to bail Luce out of death matches, Kay and Gus getting a little closer as friends, Willow feeling as confident as she ever has, and Amity... My friends, I think it's time. We need to talk about Lumity in Season 1. Even after Luce and Amity actually started dating in Season 2, I found the shipping in Season 1 to be kinda rushed. I didn't mind Amity having a turnaround with time. Maybe it's just the use of the rivals to lovers trope, but it's kinda hard to see this happening so fast when Season 1 takes place over the course of, what, a month? Episode 3, Amity hates Willow, so she hates Luce for being her excuse for homework. Episode 5, Amity still hates Luce, but it's a little more justified, and she gets to know Luce a little better. Episode 7, Luce brings out a bit of Amity's soft side as they're forced to work together, and Amity decides to reconsider where she stands on Luce. Episode 12, Luce and Amity become proper friends. Episode 15, Amity blushes. Episode 16, Amity tries to ask Luce out. So, yeah. Luce went from Amity's rival to her crush over 6 starring episodes. Oh yeah, and I guess she appeared in episode 6 too, so maybe that gives it a little more time, but who cares. I sometimes complain about Amity developing a crush this quickly, but I think what saves the ship from feeling too rushed is that there's time in between all these episodes where Amity appears. And if I can be honest, I had started shipping it by this episode too. Luce and Amity just bounced off each other in such a charming way that I truthfully wanted to see them get together. Maybe not as early as episode 5, like some other people apparently did, but like Luce and Amity's relationship itself, it just took time. I still screamed when the Ask Out letter turned out to be for Luce, and I was excited to see what the future held for these two cuties. Perhaps other than Amity gay panicking 5 separate times in the next episode, but love the representation, love this girl, but there's such a thing as pushing it. Lumity is good, Lumity is nice, Lumity is much appreciated, Lumity is great, Lumity gives me life, maybe a few people in the fandom only care about Lumity. Where were we? Agony of a Witch was pretty amazing. Remember Dana saying Season 1 didn't feel like her vision of the show until the last few episodes? Well, having seen this episode, and then remembering what a standout it was from the whole rest of the season, and now having seen Season 2, it really, really shows. That is a compliment, though. I love how fast the episode escalates. It really made my head explode. It's already not a fun episode, you know? This time around, Luce isn't doing a good deed just because why not? Ida's curse is about to overtake her, and Luce is so genuinely worried about that happening that she takes a huge risk in the hopes of healing her. The end of the season is nigh, and Luce's character arc is coming full circle with this newfound maturity. It's just so anxiety-inducing the whole time. You may notice that Luce keeps the hood on her Hexside uniform up the whole time, just so no one recognizes that she's human. As small a detail as that may be, it defines the stakes. If Luce gets recognized for the human she is, the Emperor will know it's that human. Idolin Clawthorn's human. There's plenty of Ida reflecting on Luce's influence on her, and just wanting to do something nice for her because of that. And that all adds to the heartbreak of the climax. Which, yeah, the climax. Look, I didn't think Lilith was that great in Season 1 looking back. She had a pretty good introduction, but from there on out, she didn't even appear that much, and when she did, she was just kind of a bland recurring antagonist without much of a threat, because you know it's a fun mundane adventure where the protags are gonna win. The last 5 minutes of this episode may have made me want to slap her to death, but that's a good thing. It definitely made me think more of her character if nothing else. This fight is so nail-biting. Seeing Ida drain her magic in defense of her kid, and then going into beast mode permanently in the process is just devastating. Lilith's a jerk, Luce is traumatized, and can't do anything to stop this. And it's all because of her failed mission. Everything hurts. Everything. From the way Luce breaks down crying, to the week we had to wait for the next episode, this was scary, dangerous, and just sad. Anyway, the finale wasn't as good. Young Blood Old Souls is a perfect season finale, buried underneath the rushed one. I'll start by mentioning the obvious liar twist with Belos. Like, Lily, of course he wasn't going to heal Ida's curse. While Ida getting petrified instead of healed was kind of the easy way out, I'll give it that it's at least an intimidating threat. But the real problem here was just that everything happened too fast. Cold open on King reading some Boiling Isles history, for some reason. Then Luce tries to justify what she's doing. Then they hit the road. Then Luce is suddenly way more skilled at glyph magic than ever before with no on-screen building or practicing. Then Luce and Ida have a heart-to-heart and say goodbye. Luce breaks down in tears again. Fight scene with Luce and Lilith. Then they head to the human realm briefly, which doesn't do anything for the episode. Then there's a flashback. Then Luce and Lilith make up. Then Luce battles Belos. Then Luce has to destroy the portal door. Then Luce stops the petrification way too easily. I got exhausted just by writing this summary into the script. But it's basically the SparkNotes version of this whole episode. There just wasn't enough time for anything that happened this time. Of course I'm happy everything turned out okay. And that last scene with Ida and Lilith was pretty amazing, but man, we could have had a masterpiece of a finale if either A, the previous episode was the season finale and this was the season 2 premiere, or B, this episode was 44 minutes instead of 22. I can understand wanting to end the first season of a general audience's show on a positive note, but seeing how great the season was getting, this was just disappointing with how broken its pacing was. At least the episode itself ended really nicely. Season 1 overall was good, although in retrospect, we as the fandom really gassed up this season. I think in 2020 we were all just starved for Disney TVA's next Gravity Falls, and this show just kinda gave us that automatically. I mean, this show has Gravity Falls in its blood. The creator worked on Gravity Falls, Ida is basically the female version of Grunkle Stan, Alex Hirsch himself was a creative consultant and even voice actor, how could you not love that? In blood, roots, destiny, tone, and structure, this was easily the Disney cartoon the most like Gravity Falls since, well, Gravity Falls. This season had a lot of good things going for it, but now that the show is done, you can really tell that the show wasn't what it was meant to be yet. That's fine, as very few shows are in their first seasons, but there's just something missing here that the rest of the show has in spades. Hooty, while still funny, is much more of a butt monkey than a member of the family. Yes, while I did still like him in season 1 was kind of obnoxious, there are some other things I'm probably forgetting to mention, and the season in general, while still good, is much more of a mixed bag than season 2 and the specials. However, the show presented some great things in spite of its faults. Well-written redemption arcs, nice comedy, and a much more effective message presented than the pilot gave. There are some circumstances where you'll have to sacrifice your individuality to thrive, but as unfortunate as that is, you should still do all you can to be yourself. All this, and the season itself gradually getting better, were signs that it was all uphill from here. Okay, but I didn't expect the show to get this much better. I've noticed a bit of a theme with Disney cartoons peaking at season 2. Big City Greens, Amphibia, but in Owl House's case, what happened here? Because I love it. Season 1 was good, but ultimately not great. I had already grown to love this show by the end of season 1, but holy crap, season 2 was a night and day improvement. Everything that was built upon or even lightly touched on before is built up from the ground beautifully. It's basically season 1 again, but literally everything is better. So it's really not like season 1 at all. Luce is much more mature and relatable to me, King is infinitely more compelling, Ida is simply at her best, Amity is a completely new and better person, further epitomized by her new hair, Gus has a deeper voice and much more to him than one-note charismatic best friend energy, Lilith is at least 10 times more likable, even the animation and visuals are better, there's just too many good things to talk about. You know what? I think I'd like to start with the visuals, because that's easily going to take the least amount of time to talk about. But that's not to diminish from how impressive it is. It's kinda hard to explain, I should probably just say, it's a glow-up if there ever was one. From the moment the season began, I immediately noticed more of a shine in the characters' eyes, which automatically looked more appealing. If it makes any sense, where Season 1 focused more on shading, Season 2 has more focus on lighting. Season 1 had good animation and everything too, but everything just looks a little shinier here, you know what I mean? Something I just need to commend the writers for is that not a second of this season felt like it went to waste. I know how much rewriting they had to do after Season 3 was cut, and that must have been a total nightmare to do remotely, but I'm never not on the edge of my seat. Every episode counts. Not to say Season 1 didn't have an overarching story, but this season is almost completely different. Most of Season 1's lesser episodes were at least optional in the grand scheme of the show. Of course mundane adventures are necessary to endear you to the characters sometimes, but that's neither here nor there in Season 2. So much happens across all of these episodes that fan theories changed like the wind depending on whatever happened every week. The hype was real because the show just kept putting out banger episode after banger episode. Most shows targeted at adults have a pace like this, and while this show kept putting up with different kinds of Disney's crap with every season, from collaboration in season 1 to having to pull everything together in season 2 before the abridged third season, it's this kind of storytelling that feels much more natural in a world like this. There are way more compelling internal struggles with the main characters, whether it be not knowing what you want for your future or even parental anxiety. You can just tell it's way closer to what Dana wanted. If you ever paid attention to the opening credits of episodes, you might even have noticed that some of the episodes were written solo by her. I'm so glad we got a full season of this kind of storytelling, even if it's essentially what caused the show's cancellation. This season in particular just feels like the living proof we needed that animation is for everyone of all ages. Like, this is technically a kid's show, right? Just listen to this line from Amity in episode 9.
I grew up thinking that everything was an opportunity to justify existing. But there are people out there who won't make you feel worthless. You just have to let yourself meet them.
This is such beautiful dialogue to hear, for anyone. Anyone in a new relationship, or looking for a partner, or just feeling a little depressed during close. That crowd is rarely just children, and through it all, the show presents this message in such a way that allows kids to think about it. I love this show so much. But how are the main trio this season? Let's start with Luce, of course. While she has mellowed out from her living out a fantasy phase, Luce now has a lot more to think about. She may want to be a witch, but where does she want to go from there? What does she want to do with the power of a witch? What will she tell her mom? What will she tell her friends? It's so hard to say, and all the while, Luce's people-pleasing nature is overriding her journey of self-discovery. First time? I found Luce to be super relatable from here on out. It's not just me being around her age as the season aired. I have never seen a show portray teenage emotions quite so accurately like this one. Luce is feeling bad about herself. She constantly feels like she owes people just for being there for her. Sometimes you don't need a character death to make a scene super emotionally powerful. It may be a tearful heart-to-heart with characters, or just some small but still impressively accurate attention to detail. Take for example the end of Reaching Out. Notice how Luce's eyes are half-lidded, but she's still smiling. She's just happy to pick flowers and be there with Amity. But she's been denying her problems all day, and she just has a lot taken out of her. I can't remember the last time I saw something like this in a show. It's just so accurate to how so many people feel after emotional breakdowns. It's just one of the many things that this show represents so well. Most of Luce's adventures and quests in this season have much more of a "you've done so much for me, I owe you" motive. In episode 1, Luce wants to make up for Ida losing her powers, going broke, nearly being petrified, etc., so that's what sets her off on the pirate adventure. In season 1, Luce probably would have just gone into something like that saying, "Pirate adventure? Where?" Luce has already grown so much, it's depressing. She's not the same fantasy-loving, plucky goofball she was a few months ago. She's developed into a painfully accurate representation of being a people-pleaser. And through it all, she's still compelling and entertaining to watch. I can't believe this character went from an artificial oddball prototype that stood out to me as much as a plain popsicle to the most relatable protagonist I can remember, and the kind I want to see more like. Luce is vastly improved upon this season, but you know who I always liked better and only got better this season? Ida. Holy crap, Ida. Episode 4 is probably the weakest episode all season, even though it was just kind of okay. I get why I liked it so much at first, but a lot of it is just Ida's mom Gwendolyn being an anti-vaxxer. The biggest positive, though, is the symbolism of Ida's curse. Here more than ever, it feels like a metaphor for growing up with chronic illness or disability. The moment where Ida grabs the owl beast and says, "My turn to drive," as a means of reconciling with her mother, that is beautiful. However, none of this even comes close to what might just be a perfect episode. You ever watched something and came out feeling just depressed? Yeah, that for me was Ida's Requiem. It remains one of my favorites of the series even to this day. We've seen over a season of Ida being a mom for Luce and King at this point, but everything has changed since then. Ida lost her magical ability, Luce has no way home and will be stuck in the Boiling Isles for a while, and King is dad searching. Over time, Ida has become such a mother to these two, but both her adopted kids are so dead set on finding their biological families that Ida has forgotten what she means to them. Drinking the pain away only helps for so long, but then a rainstorm starts. I was immediately sold on Rain Whispers as a character. They're not perfect, they have flaws, but they're still very smart, capable, preciously awkward, and their chemistry with Ida that still thrives years after they dated gives me life, man. It freaking hurts to see Ida willing to give her life to stop the Emperor. She would do anything for that, but she's also disregarding that her kids need her too. The plot twist at the end with King's adoption warmed my heart, but it was also broken when I saw Rain give himself away to the Coven Heads for Ida's sake. Ida is so much more complex this season and more of a loving, caring mother than ever before. This season has her at her peak. King is much more compelling as well. This season really was his time to shine after season 1 put him in a bunch of goofy scenarios that, let's be honest, didn't accomplish much. He spends the season on a mission to discover his roots, but everywhere he goes it leads to horrifying revelations. He was never a ruler, but he's found a better life just being himself and being around his family. Anytime he gets an episode this season, it's an edge-of-your-seat experience. Echoes of the Past was actually low-key amazing, from the imagery to the atmosphere. Not to mention, how can Alex Hirsch sound so devastated while not even talking in his normal voice? Episode 17 is cruel to him.
We're almost done.
Then we get to play catch, right?
And that's all I need to prove my point. And all these struggles amongst the main cast sorta come to a head on July 31st, 2021, otherwise known as the day we as a species peaked. To this day, I still remember how people were talking about knocking on Hootie's door, like, guys, call me crazy, but this was my favorite episode of season 2. Like, think about the resolutions we came to in just this one episode, and somehow it still felt surprisingly natural. But then we all agreed on that. And I don't know if it's still a hot take now that the show is done, but god damn it, this is still the best episode of the Owl House. In 20 minutes, King discovered a new power, Ida formed a truce with the Owl Beast in a beautiful dream sequence, and Lumity became canon, thanks to Hootie the Owl Tube with a maybe infinitely extendable neck. Hootie was already the best character, but he is yet another that I think Season 2 improved. He feels much more welcomed into the family, not just the annoying narcissist that everyone either couldn't stand or found him weird. I loved Hootie from the beginning way before his starring episode. He was funny and relentlessly charming. This episode, though, shows him with the best of intentions, and he helps everyone out in his own hilariously elaborate ways. King's bit mostly just provided a lot of great comedy, but it was still a massive W for King. Shockwaves are pretty cool too, and while I had a feeling King was a Titan, the journey to this predictable reveal was so well fleshed out, and this episode was a huge part of that. I'm impressed by how impressive it all was for 7 minutes of the episode. Ida had the best portion, don't at me. It's fascinating to see all the different parts of Ida's life flashing by, but I just keep thinking of that bit of the dream where Ida sort of fuses with the Beast after getting so mad at it. The Beast doesn't want to be there either, so they at least can agree on that, and Ida gets a whole new form out of it. The whole dream is such an effective piece of storytelling. Also, Lumity, baby! The first time I saw this episode, I found the Tunnel of Love scene to be pretty uncomfortable, and to be honest, I still do. That's a compliment though, I can tell it was supposed to feel that way. But oh my god, the asking out scene was simply perfect. Kids, if you have a crush, just confess. They won't say no, I promise. And yeah, it's from here where Luce and Amity became a thing. Let me tell you, these two aren't just my favorite fictional LGBTQIA+ couple, but one of my favorite fictional couples, period. This is the kind of representation the gay community has needed for ages. Luce and Amity are super supportive of each other, they bounce off each other super well, they love the crap out of each other, and it's all treated like a normal relationship. Thank you! Whenever someone acknowledges that they're together, no one ever calls out the fact that it's a same-sex relationship. Again, in reaching out, Amity says, "You didn't even know I was dating Luce," to her dad, to which Alador responds, "Adelin's kid?" He doesn't say, "But Luce is a girl." He treated it like any relationship. Remember in Clouds on the Horizon when Adalia said, "Girlfriend? Oh, no, no, no. We'll find you a new girlfriend, someone who's not on wanted posters everywhere." And we all collectively said, well, at least she's not homophobic. This is what we need in cartoons. Gay men like guys in the same way straight guys like girls. It's not a feeling that one can control. Thank you all so much for the flirting, kissing, terms of endearment, and just overall helping to normalize same-sex relationships and everything else under the umbrella. Gotta say though, maybe the shipping fuel was a little distracting. Case in point, episode 5. Sure, it was when Amity got the purple hair and kissed Luce, but the shipping really overshadowed Gus's plot, which, mind you, was written as the A plot. Get this, the filler video I made back in April was very well received, but so many of the comments completely missed the point. One of them is relevant to this topic because it said something like, "I would argue that the Owl House Season 2 did have some filler, like for example Gus's story in episode 5. Do I need to explain the issue? Sir, I've spared you by scribbling out your name and profile picture, but you know who you are, so please just know that you made me want to stab my eyes out." Still, not to diminish from what a fantastic ship Lumity is. Positive representation doesn't do jack squat if it's only at the end of the show. Thanks again for letting us see more than half a season of the main characters being in a relationship. Give it time, that's how you make it work. Even if the next episode really, really wants you to know the characters are together. All this happened in 22 minutes, thanks to the already lovable and treasured character that is Hootie. I don't get why he had to promise never to help anyone ever again. He meant so well, and sure, he swallowed and kidnapped people, but he actually took a more direct approach, which helped immensely in its own unique way. Also, I genuinely think Hootie's mental breakdown at the end is the saddest scene in the entire show, and I won't elaborate further. Again, don't at me. Hootie's starring episode is godlike. I don't know who expected any different or why. Lilith is also miles better this season. Her and Hootie being besties was something I both never expected and didn't know I needed. But on top of that, she's a lot more like an onion in this season. Liliths have layers. She feels guilty for her actions and all the time she's wasted in the Emperor's Coven. There's simply so much more of her making earnest attempts to make up for her past mistakes, reconnecting with her family, and if nothing else, just being Hootie's pal. I wish she stayed at the Owl House for at least a few more episodes. She'd fit right in. Thanks for all the rewrites and storyboard changes, Disney. There were some great new characters this season too. I've already been over Rain, but V is adorable and also really sad for just one starring episode all season. The other Coven heads seem pretty cool too, even though I only actually liked 2 of them as characters. I've heard it was planned for there to be more exploration of all the Coven heads individually, but again, thanks Disney. Honestly, that's the biggest issue with this season though. The pacing. Nearly every episode is great this season, and that's no small feat. But so much keeps happening episode by episode that this actually kind of a no time to explain just go mantra. I like being kept on the edge of my seat, but there's such a thing as moving too quickly. Like how Hunter really only had 1 episode before he was unmasked. Oh god, I summoned him! How have I gone this long without mentioning Hunter? He, as well, is marvelously complex. He starts off as pretty obnoxious and genius teen prodigy, but we see so many more sides of him as the season goes on. I didn't love how it only took until his second major appearance for his face to be revealed, but I'm again going to assume that was because of the shortening. I think his and Luce's dynamic in hunting talismans still could have worked if he was wearing his mask, but it's still effective, and like Luce and Amity's Rivals to Lovers arc in Season 1, it had the advantage of time passing between their episodes together. He shows up again in Eclipse Lake, but I kinda already talked about it. His next appearance was in Any Sport in a Storm, which was unfortunately Willow's only time to shine at this season. Still one of my favorites of the season, though. It wasn't Hunter's moment of changing sides, but it is the first we really get to see of Hunter exploring his interests after not having a chance to all his life. Despite Hunter ultimately backstabbing them and regretting it, seeing him, Willow, Gus, Scara, and Viney, the latter 2 of which are a couple of my favorite minor characters for some arbitrary reason, is just plain wholesome. And by Titan, we need to talk about Hollow Mind. Emperor Belos was already a really creepy villain, but we didn't know much about him. There's just something so thematically smart about the episode starting with Luce wanting to prove what a jerk Belos is, and King saying, no one wants to feel like they've wasted their life following the wrong person. He's right, and yet the episode ends with Hunter in an absolute panic about all the time he's wasted listening to Belos' lies. Nothing is ever the same after this trip inside the Mindscape. There's nothing quite as much of a twisted nightmare as the intrusive thoughts of a guy who's screwed up in the head, and this episode uses that fact to earn its PG. Way back when, I had a theory that Belos wanted the door to the human realm because he wasn't actually an enemy. I got the feeling that Belos was human, and that he wanted to unite the realms for a good reason. Even Matthew Rhys, Belos' voice actor, said that Belos was just misunderstood or something. But how did that statement age? Well, remember in Amphibia where True Colors made everyone think Andreas was an irredeemable monster, whereas we just weren't sure about Belos? Yeah, both shows basically went on to play their own respective Uno reverse cards. Andreas just turned out to have 1,000 years of daddy issues under his belt, while Belos turned out to be a literal witch Nazi. That is the only time I will make that association, by the way, because I don't think you can say that word on YouTube. Belos was Philip Woodabane. He grew up in a time where witches were quite literally demonized, but when he and his brother Caleb discovered the Boiling Isles, Caleb fell in love with a witch and was taken aback by the realm's various wonders. Philip continued to enclose himself from the witches, and any chance at being friends with them. Being a prejudiced sore loser with a terribly closed-off perspective, he thought he was the good guy just for hating witches. Dude murdered his brother, cloned him, cursed himself, got stuck in the demon realm, and then killed the clone and made another one once the clone realized what a malicious jerk he was. He continues to lie both to his nephews and the people of the Isles that it was wild magic that burnt down your city, not me behind the scenes. Hunter is one of those clones. Belos deliberately lied to Hunter that he had this greater purpose, when Hunter was just expendable. The person he looked up to like nobody else was a shut-in who's been fixated on wiping out all life in the demon realm for 400 years. He branded all the witches with sigils, which had the sole purpose of killing them all at once. He is ruthless, and seeing Luce and Hunter react to all the horrifying information is awful. He had never seen Bellows with the malicious grin, but this episode showed that for the first time. It may be a small detail, but it's physically painful to look at. We weren't sure about this man's true intentions before this episode came out, but here we saw that he takes joy in psychologically tormenting kids. Luce feels terrible for turning out to be a pawn in Philip's game, even though she couldn't have known. He knows what makes Luce feel terrible. He knows how to take advantage of who she is. And he has been stuck in the past all this time, without even considering if the human realm has changed since he left, or forming any meaningful supportive relationships. Bellows was starting to feel thematically smart. Luce didn't just make friends in the demon realm, but she made her first real friends over a couple months there. Luce became more grounded with time there. Luce found a family. On the other side of the coin, Bellows never made any friends over centuries. These witches made him their emperor for some reason, but was he loved by anyone specifically on a personal level? Bellows became more delusional, and being emperor only thickened his god complex. He set the rules. He said only he had the right to mix magic. This really came to a head, quite literally, in the Season 2 finale. Luce was right. For someone who never shuts up about saving humanity from evil, his humanity sure is buried 6 billion feet under. There were some impressive themes, a great battle scene, and then Collector jump scare! Fun fact, Dane and Tara shared on the Post-Shoot live show that the Collector wasn't planned from the start. They always wanted to make a character like the Collector, but he just didn't fit into their plan for the story. But when Season 3 was cut, they threw their hands in the air and said, let's get nuts. They threw him into the story. And like, I'm sorry, but am I the only one who has no trouble believing that? For what it's worth, they did a pretty good job working him into the plot, but there was no intentional foreshadowing for the Collector for the longest time, and he wasn't really relevant at all until halfway through Season 2. Like, I still remember in episode 12, I was only half paying attention, and all the Collector stuff felt completely lost on me. I felt so dumb. I felt stupid that this episode had all this plot in it, and my biggest takeaway was Flora fucking Dispora! Ultimately, I still felt like the season finale kind of fumbled the bag. We didn't get a lot of information on the Collector, all things considered. He just kind of seemed like a plot device for the actual villain with the goofy dynamic of being a hyperactive little kid with godly powers. There's a lot you could do with that, but I just didn't see a thematically smart villain in this kid. Not at this point in the show anyway. I was crazy impressed by how they did make it work in Season 3, but I just couldn't get behind him as a threat because we didn't know what was actually happening. We didn't know he was going to turn everyone into puppets. Not to mention, how much could he have done, and how much worse could it have been than everyone on the Isles dying? We may have gotten more information on the Collector in Season 3, but here, the stakes just felt so undefined. And no, I'm not intrigued because the threat is left so ambiguous. Maybe they could have bargained with Disney a little more to make the episode a little longer, and then put the opening of For the Future at the end of this episode. Even if Luce just said, what's even happening, and King said, I don't know, but you're not safe here, I would have been much more invested in the drama. The heartbreaking dialogue and music is there, but none of the issues with this episode are rectified by anything that comes later on. I suppose the episode is better on rewatch now that I know the full arc of the series, but I just couldn't believe that the season finale, for the second time in a row, didn't really live up to the rest of the season. It stings like heck, because this episode had the potential to be a much better finale. I honestly think it was until the last 5 minutes, but then it just turned into True Colors, but worse. I did like seeing Bellows roast the crap out of Kikimora, though.
Or, if you're looking for a new right hand...
Have you as my right hand? I'd sooner cut off my whole arm.
Damn! Okay, for real, in spite of a few faults, Season 2 is shockingly great. I feel like this season really earns the right to be praised like that. Not just because there literally were so many consistently great episodes, but it's just everything I could have asked for and more in a second season of this show. It's exciting, emotional, funny, creative, and so eventful that it's like 2 seasons for the price of 1. Every character is better than before, there's more instances of smooth animation, the tone is more mature, every single episode feels like it's essential to the story, the shipping is much more believable, and there are multiple really entertaining character dynamics. The new characters are some of the best all series. Time travel is thrown in surprisingly late into the story, and yet they seamlessly pull it off with a perfectly closed off time loop that makes my brain hurt. There are just too many great aspects to count. This season was so good it made Season 1 look mid. But seriously, It's a poster child for serialized storytelling that Western animation needs more of. The story matters, and the audience always gets something when they tune in every week, but through it all, the characters still matter most. This season made this show what it was meant to be. Living, breathing proof that animation is for everyone. So, about Season 3. Since the season actually isn't really a full one, we're going to cover each of the 3 specials individually one by one, and then talk about what I thought of it as a whole. It was a short season that gave the creators one hell of a job to do. Wrap everything up in 2.5 hours' time. From a believable solution to the biggest cliffhanger of the series so far, to a climactic final battle, to a satisfying resolution for the whole show. And sure, it doesn't do this flawlessly, but how did it go? Let's answer that question by starting with... To start, you know one thing I loved about this episode? I loved being a fan and watching this episode when it first aired. I will admit, as awesome as Season 2B was, and as much noteworthy stuff happened, I didn't like that it aired at the same time as Amphibious Season 3B. Reminder, Season 3B was the final batch of episodes for The Frog Show. I was so nervous about what would happen in Amphibious finale that I just didn't know which show to pay more attention to. I like that these 3 specials each aired 3 months apart from each other. Not only did it make each of the 3 specials an event in themselves, but... yeah, that's it. None of the specials had anything to share the spotlight with. And I should hope so. They were all special extended episodes. And I still remember the night of October 15th, 2022, the hype was alive with the sound of... Look, I was already a little worried that maybe, just maybe, these 3 specials wouldn't stick the landing. And I'll be honest, I think I was justified there. Like, what other shows got dealt a hand like this? But golly gosh, what was I thinking? Wasn't Season 2 any indication? Thanks to them was absolutely airtight. I wasn't sure how they were going to make the episode feel believable. When Amphibia did this, it took weeks to find a way back from Earth. Half the season was spent there. So with the limited time the show had by comparison, they took the good old time skip approach. It's really been months since the gang wound up in the human realm. There's this amazing montage at the beginning with all the time they spent in the human realm. I know a lot of people were complaining about Amphibia feeling like it forgot all the danger that was going on the other side, and yeah, Owl House would have felt the same if Season 3 wasn't cut short, but truth be told, I would empty my bank account to see at least half a season of Luce and her friends hanging out together. Think of all the scrapbook pictures in that one scene too. Like, just imagine all the potential for full episodes about Luce coming out to her mom, or the kids going river rafting, or putting on funny costumes, or a Lumity milkshake date. There are some things that are even lightly touched on, but I still would have loved to see them as mini arcs in the season. Like Amity hanging out more than ever with Willow and Gus again, and the way things are a little awkward, but they're still making it work, and... you feel me? Although, much like Season 2 as a whole, no time feels like it went to waste. We get as much of an Earth arc as we could with this one episode. Be it the squad exploring the human realm, or the fact that they don't return to the Boiling Isles until the very end of the episode, and that we don't come back to the Demon Realm or see Eden King directly even once this whole episode. Everything is done to make the return feel as believable as can be, and the character arcs explored in this episode were simply great. Right off the bat, Hunter in this episode is as good as he's ever been. I was low-key hoping that he would ultimately stay in the human realm in the end, since he's clearly happier than ever, and what does he really have left for him in the Demon Realm? A quote-unquote family fueled with hatred and lies? I still see some sense in him staying in the Boiling Isles, since that's where his friends are, but it's really nice character development. It's also pretty unanimous for teens to struggle with carving out their identities. As a very likable ex-Coven Scout once said, wants can change, so can people. But think about poor Hunter. He's lost everything he's ever had. Sure, that was mostly just abusive relationships and psychological manipulation, but it gave him a sense of self. It may be time for Hunter to start fresh. New world, new moment, new everything. He's learning to sew, getting obsessed with wolves, and while he doesn't know where he's going, it's his way. This arc comes full circle in the episode's climax when Belos possesses Hunter. Hunter now knows that he's creating his own self to love. He's telling Belos firsthand that he wants to be a kid, hang out with his friends, explore his interests through study, and catch up on everything he's missed out on for years. Hunter has grown so much in a season's time. He is easily among the best characters in the show, top 3 at least. I really hope this precious boy is okay forevermore. And Luce in this episode is... upsetting? I don't mean that from a critical standpoint, but she's clearly so much sadder than ever before. Quick warning that the subject matter is about to get heavy. If you can handle a discussion about depression and suicidal thoughts, then okay, great. please join me in this conversation. But if it's a sore subject for you, feel free to skip to this time frame. Thanks anyways. I think Luz is meant to be depicted as depressed in this episode. Notice how her eyes are almost always halfway open and staring off into space, as well as her quieter, more somber tone of voice. It's spelled out pretty well to the audience that Luz is feeling twice as guilty as the next guy for everything that's happened to the Isles. She may have inadvertently helped cause the Day of Unity, but she didn't know that Bellos was Philip, let alone that the two were both total jerks. Nevertheless, Luz refuses to cut herself any slack. If she felt bad for almost getting Ada petrified, try everyone nearly dying, and then getting your friends trapped in another realm indefinitely, while neither you nor they know if their friends or families are alive. Luz feels like the bad guy. She feels like she deserves to make herself sad. Her plan may be to stay in the human realm, with the less people hurt by her, the better, but she compares herself to the protagonist of a book in her English class all about fate versus free will. Something she went through herself. She projects her own insecurities onto the main character of the book, saying everyone should hate his guts and that the world would have been better without his existence. This is obviously coming from the same place of projection, but I don't need to repeat myself there. Luz is forgetting that she's done plenty of good things. It's so easy for the mind to highlight mistakes. Psychologically, we do that to help protect ourselves, internally shouting, "Don't do that again!" I've totally been in Luz's shoes before, maybe on a smaller scale, but she's zooming in way too much on all the ways she's messed up that she can't even acknowledge the multiple families who love her and think the world of her. She doesn't even feel like she deserves those families because it's their lives she threw a wrench into. Let me tell you here and now that being suicidal is not automatically the same thing as wishing you were never born, but they are two similar feelings that come from the same place. Feeling like you as a person have no good purpose in this world. It's an awful feeling, but truly a normal one for humans to feel. If I can be honest, I really do think that if Owl House was strictly an adult cartoon, we would have seen Luz considering suicide. I don't think it can be argued against that Luz was written as depressed in this episode. Thankfully, that's not here. I still love the representation of depression here because it's a human thing. But on another semi-related note, Camilla is a great mom. I've already spoken at length about where Camilla stood on her daughter's personality, and some of the things like Camilla arguing with the principal about Luz quote-unquote acting out for attention, or the video diary scene where it's revealed that the Azora book was a parting gift from Luz's dad, while they didn't retroactively improve the pilot, were emotional gut punches. I do like the detail that Luz's crazy book report was her attempt to connect with her mom and teacher. This started to feel like the real reason we came to the human realm in this show. If every isekai reverse was just go back to the natural world for a bit just to find a way back out, it wouldn't leave the trip to the natural world with much value. In Amphibia, the goal there was to establish Earth as a setting, and in Owl House, it was to do the heavy lifting with Luz's mom. Seriously, Camilla could have been one of the best characters in the show if there was just a bit more time for her. Thanks to them, does so many things right, and I haven't even mentioned V fitting in seamlessly with the Hex Squad. She was such a nice addition to the gang, and I loved her new design. I respected her decision to stay in the human realm in the end, but I think it would have been nice if she came with. She's a sweet character who we also could have seen more of. Additionally, Flapjack's death was beautifully somber. Rip Flapjack. Can we please start a hashtag for Flapjack trend? Everything you do it for Flapjack. This lovable little wooden red bird who gave his life to save his masters. If you're gonna do something, do it for him. You do the dishes, it's for Flapjack. You do a bit of community service, you do it for Flapjack. What are you doing for Flapjack today? Now then, this creative team sure has proven their ability to make the most of materials given. I think we should take this episode's airtight impressive status as a sign that it's all uphill from here. Is what I would be saying, but oh god, what went wrong here? Okay, fine. I'll start by saying this. For the Future is not a bad episode. It's just easily the weakest of the three specials. It had a lot of positives, and I didn't think it was bad, but there were far too many things this episode spent too much time on. More problems feel brought up than resolved, and I don't know about you, but that's kind of an issue in the second to last episode. But hey, I'm a person who likes to look for the good in everything, so let's start with the positives. Right off the bat, this episode handled the Collector much better than Season 2 ever did. It's still impressive to me that they were able to take this character who I barely thought anything of until now, and give him a reason to be feared, as well as more of a personality in general. Plus, Bellos is still the main villain, so they did good. Nothing is going right in the Isles. All the people are either imprisoned or scared by the Collector's rule. Because of that, the landscape of the Isles is destroyed, and anyone left is hiding. The Collector just doesn't care though. He doesn't understand the concept of death, and he's only having fun, so that's what matters. Poor kid has been babysitting this whittled godchild for months. That's really effective and keeps you thinking. It was also really nice to give Willow some attention this episode after she barely got any in Season 2. She's overworking herself and making herself stress out in the process. And the metaphor for her life getting all cluttered with the pent-up emotional damage with the tangling vines is great. I also quite like the music in that scene. Why haven't I brought that up yet? The music in these 3 specials is the best it's consistently been for the whole show. I absolutely wouldn't critique the team for reusing some tracks here and there, since that does happen quite a bit this season, but they're still put to good use. Doing stuff like that is objectively being cheap and cutting corners, but it's not laziness. Reusing assets is the real magic, you guys. And whenever it's a whole new track, it's godlike. Willow venting it all out to Hunter was great to see, and I actually started shipping them from here. Why did that seem so out of left field at first? The hints were there, how blind was I? This episode might just be Camila at her best, better than she wasn't thanks to them. From her discussion with Willow and Gus towards the beginning, to the crazy impression the Demon Realm made on her, to the heart-to-heart with her daughter, and what a segue, the build-up to Luce's Palisman reveal. Beautifully executed, and the actual reveal was just the way to end this episode. String Bean is so Luce's Palisman, you know? The color scheme, the adorable design, the little bit of everything that Luce always goes for. I just can't, man. It was, in my opinion, the most noteworthy part of the episode, and easily the highlight. That sounds like a pretty fantastic episode so far, right? Well, yeah, it is. A fantastic episode, buried underneath New Hexside. I think I see the problem here. On a surface level, it just seems like we spent too much time at Hexside. I will say though, going back to Hexside did have some promise in itself. It's kinda cool seeing the kids being the only ones left, and of course it was essential for a while because they needed to get the teleportation glyph out of Luce's head. But you're all waiting for me to say it. Why did Ida and Lilith break free from the Collector and discover that he's weak to Titans completely off screen? I know the writers didn't think there would be time for it, but couldn't they have just turned these images during the credits into a 10 to 20 second flashback that really didn't need any dialogue? And no, I'm not letting it slide because it was a visual in the credits. Put it in the episode or it doesn't count. It was just really awkward, as much as I love this look on Lilith. Still though, it's not entirely the creative team's fault. What I think was the creative team's fault was the thing you were actually waiting for me to bring up. Who invited my men Basha and Kikimora? Bros think they on the team? Look, I understand that the whole plotline of the group being separated and thrown into the detention pit may have also been sort of a last resort. I could tell they needed the episode to end in a specific place, and I know that the reveal of Luce's Palisman wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the whole sidetrack, but just, what writer, Nate, what intern at the studio was like, wouldn't it be funny if you brought back Kiki and Basha to pad out the second to last episode? And then what writer said, here Dan, have my house? Even if this mess of a storyline sorta did something for the plot, I really feel like they could have done better. Imagine if Luce rallied all the students together to get them on board to save the Isles, instead of just getting rejected by Basha and giving up. Think of how exciting it would be to see a climax where the characters are fighting the Collector's spies. I actually really enjoyed Mytholomew in this episode, which is something I thought I'd never say. And the Blight siblings were there too, so couldn't there have just been a fight scene with all those guys at least? I just can't believe the episode was written in such a way that the writers were all like, well, Bellis and the Collector need to meet again in this episode, and we gotta catch up with Ida and King, so Luce needs something to do. There's some other issues I had with this episode too. Odalia is as much a waste of time as she is a waste of space, and I don't know what went wrong, but the humor just felt really off in this episode for some reason. Oh, and the misunderstandings trope, even though it didn't really go anywhere. All this, and it literally just doesn't feel like the penultimate episode until the last 15 seconds. These specials felt less like one big finale and more like a condensed version of Amphibia Season 3. Hear me out. Thanks to Them is like Amphibia 3A because it involves the characters being stranded on Earth, establishing the main character's home life, and it ultimately ends with a portal being built to give them a way back to the fantasy world. For the Future is reminiscent of 3B because it features the characters who were stuck on Earth for a while coming back to a destroyed world and then discovering a hidden resistance base where they stay until the finale arc, which is like what Watching and Dreaming was. The main characters defeat one of the two enemies through a redemption, and for a moment things look like they're gonna get better. Only then for the other enemy, whom the characters thought was already defeated, becomes huge and causes the main character to evaporate to death on screen. Then the MC has a conversation with a multiversal deity in space between all the realms, and comes back to end things off with a freaking bang. Those really are just a few of the Amphibia parallels. It's crazy sometimes. Sadly, For the Future was a huge step down from Thanks to Them. Most of the missed potential this season was obviously on Disney's part, but this episode is the one that I think could have been better, even given the circumstances. It really hurts because it almost makes you wonder if thanks to them set the bar too high. For the Future, despite having really high highs, was kinda missing all the best parts about thanks to them. The tone feels dumbed down because of the stupid antagonists we focused on, it's not consistently funny, and it's much more cluttered. Those negatives unfortunately weigh the episode down to just barely good. Still good, but I have to say I was pretty disappointed, and some of my doubts resurfaced. Could the story still end well in one episode? Oh, yes it could! I don't know how this episode was so good, but damn, it was better than great. With the limited time to check off all the benchmarks, this has gotta be the best the episode could have been. There's an underlying issue of lack of closure in the end, but again, Disney's fault. It holds me back from calling this episode perfect, but it's impressively close. That said, there were some nitpicks I mustered from the episode. There was definitely an opportunity for Stringbean to shapeshift a little more, but we barely saw that. This was kind of unexplained, and I don't know why no one has talked about that yet. And if there was one thing I actually have to critique, I kind of expected more out of Camila meeting Ida. It was disappointing that there wasn't even any dialogue when that happened, but it was still sweet, so I'll take it. Honestly, I remember thinking that would happen in For the Future, but I'm kinda glad that Lucida and King's reunion didn't happen until the beginning of this episode. I think 2 of the 3 specials going by without it really helped to sell me on the fact that they hadn't seen each other for months, when in reality it was only so many episodes. This episode made me appreciate the Collector even more. His backstory feels believable, and while we already got fragments of that story in episode 2, I finally felt sorry for him here. I'm so glad they actually acknowledged that the Collector doesn't really have a grasp on the concept of mortality. That, and the main 3 characters telling the Collector their stories in greater detail, greatly helped to flesh him out. Funny how his redemption didn't even feel rushed, even though it technically literally was a full 180 over the course of 2 subsequent episodes. I think that's this show's superpower. Captivating the audience in a surprisingly short amount of time. Hunter was only masked for 1 full episode, but everyone still freaked out about the face reveal. Amity went from hating Luce to loving her in, what, a month's time? I don't know if that kind of turnaround is possible in that much time, but good job I guess. And thanks to this episode for taking a victory lap / trip down memory lane that actually serves a purpose. I'm also pretty grateful that the story is scaled down a little bit. Yeah, there are some pretty significant threats to deal with, but that's all the more reason to keep it limited to the 3 main characters. This made the final battle so much less cluttered, and rewarded the pacing, even if the Hex Squad didn't get to do a lot. Now, about Titan Belos. I kinda knew Belos was gonna possess the Titan as his last resort, but the creators really went all out for this battle. Belos had already become an amazing villain as of Hollow Mind. He is the absolute essence of pure evil, but here, he's just a goopy little cockroach. His humanity is physically dead. Humans aren't made of goop. Humans don't grow moss with their bodies. Humans don't become Goopzilla. He can't even get his body back. Belos is not a human anymore. He is nothing more than a sentient pile of green shit with imagery so gross that I nearly vomited at least twice on my first viewing. Couldn't make that up if I wanted to. Luce's death was pretty amazing too. I was so surprised to see it, even for how similar it was to Amphibia. That said, I think the Owl House outdid Amphibia in this regard. I didn't mind the left field twist in either show, but Papa Titan, voiced by Aaron Hansen, holy crap.
This game has nothing to do with Disney, except that it sucks.
Puts it so well when he says that Belos may think he's in the right, but at the end of the day, he's only doing anything just because he wants to be seen as the good guy who saved everyone. Luce comes back happy and ready to put an end to his reign. Titan Luce has a design and a half, and as great as Amphibia's final battle was, I think the Owl House again did it better. Whereas Anne died because she used powers beyond mortal comprehension, Luce died all of a sudden, then came back with powers beyond mortal comprehension. While Amphibia already had the popping off animation, kick-ass music, and fighting like a family, there's just something more immaculately satisfying about the death scene and the battle scene happening in that order. The fight scene is already amazing, but we know no one's life is at stake other than the villains, and the protags are just having fun while fighting them off, with all the perfect touches made to the scene. Not to mention, Rain gets in on it too. Yes, please! Oh, and speaking of immaculate satisfaction...
That's it! Everyone! We've ascended, life could cease tomorrow and we'd all be happy.
Any show that's even listed under the comedy genre should have an element of happy to its finale. Something to make the audience cheer and leap out of their seats. The characters need at least some kind of triumph. And if this, along with the Azura callback and Belos getting stomped out afterwards just in case he thought we were sorry, isn't a triumph, I couldn't tell you what is. I have to say though, Ida getting Rain stopping Velos out would have been a lot more satisfying with a guttier sound effect. Like, tell me what sounds better, the original or the same clip but with a squash and a bone crack sound effect over it.
That was extremely satisfying.
Still, bang your final battle accompanied by a really nice epilogue. This is not a department in which the Owl Show outdid the Frog Show, since there wasn't as much dialogue, and let me tell you, some characters really could have used more dialogue. Nevertheless, it was a satisfying epilogue, especially the thing with the sigil removal device that Amity's dad made. Would you believe me if I told you that I was hoping for exactly this? I also found it really nice that the connection between the realms stayed there. It's not like Gravity Falls or Amphibia, which at their core were all about growing up and embracing change respectively. The Owl House was about finding your place and the people who would come to accept you, which is still a much better message than be weird because it's good, especially since Luce really did become more mature over the series. There was the whole thing about conformity versus individuality and the negative impacts of sticking to one extreme. That was mostly in Season 1, but if it's trying to say that you should strive to find a middle ground between the two, why did the guy who created the societal system turn out to be a genocidal maniac? Well, I mean, Season 1 was before we knew any of that, but there's still a very effective message all throughout the show. But you gotta understand that Bellows turning out to be such an evil, inhumane jerk was more to put parallels between him and Luce. The whole theme of finding a sense of belonging is always there though, and I think it's still pretty well presented in the Luce vs. Bellows foil. But who cares, that guy's dead now and everything's better. But in all honesty, I think the best thing I could have taken away from this show is the choose yourself message. Ever since Luce came to the Isles, everything changed. Ida started talking to her sister again and became more involved in society. King became more mature, Willow and Gus found a new best friend, Amity rediscovered her softer side and found love. Hunter and a few others left the Emperor's Coven, and so much more. Luce didn't need a prophecy to become the one who did all that. She chose to be that way. I think there's something really special about that kind of message. As many mistakes as you may make along the way, it's all within human power to change the world. You just have to make the choice and accept the challenge. Also, it's canon that the Blight parents got a divorce, yes! And that Rain moved into the Owl House? Damn, I would have paid to watch that spin-off too. I guess I can't get too upset. Great job making lemonade out of lemons, guys. So, I guess that's the Owl House. How did we get here? You know what? This show, alongside Amphibia, has been all over my mind since the beginning. I already loved it, but I think making this video and psychoanalyzing multiple characters made me appreciate it even more than before. This show was everything. An engaging story, positive representation of same-sex relationships, an accurate portrayal of growing up neurodivergent, and so much more. This show doesn't resonate with me as much as Amphibia, because its ending wasn't as meta to what was going on in my life at the time, but I'm still so glad I got to be a fan of this show. I do believe in the notion that your favorite doesn't have to mean the same thing as the best. And maybe I'm biased, because I actually saw this show as it aired, but I think The Owl House is better than Gravity Falls. And while Amphibia is locked as my favorite modern cartoon, because it'll always mean a bit more to me, I think I can confidently say, now that it's done, that The Owl House is indeed the best Disney cartoon to date. There, I said it. It sort of sucks though, because this show really did kind of end an era. Again, the end of this show didn't sync up with my life quite like Amphibia did, but I guess a whole chapter of my life is over too, and I have to move on to other shows now. I can't even imagine being a high school senior right now. For any of you who are, this show started when you were freshmen, and now a whole chapter of your guys' lives is over too. I can only think about how much it feels like you grew up alongside Luce Nocita. And while that wasn't really my case, it is undeniably sad thinking about where my interests are going to go from here. I'm still figuring out who I am, and now both of the shows that have dominated my thoughts for the last 3 years are over. I'm still super excited to see what's next though. I hope Disney learns from the success of this show that people like serialized cartoons. Even if the serial aisle goes straight to Disney Plus from here on out, I hope we get more shows from former Gravity Falls alumni because of these shows. Or even people who started work on this show or Amphibia. Get a little family tree going, you know? Animation is being treated like crap right now. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. However, I'm proud that cartoonists are working their hardest and doing everything they can to prove the medium's worth. This is why we need more shows like Owl House. to keep showing film industries how incredible and limitless animation truly is. If nothing else, this will always be a comfort show of mine, no matter how dramatic the episode is. Purely for all the fond memories I'll carry from it. Along with Amphibia, of course. Thanks again for everything, Miss Terrace. Now go find somebody better to work for.